Hello, and welcome to Inside the Recording Studio. Oh, wow, that was long. I am Jody Whitesides, and with me is Mr. Chris Hellstrom. And welcome to another episode of Inside the Recording Studio, because I just said that, and let's go. Chris, say something.
You must be a little dizzy after that long intro there, right?
Yes, as I was sitting there doing it, I was trying to act like the gopher from Caddyshack.
Yeah,
I kind of took it a little too long.
Well, here we are. No, we're ready for another episode. So how's it going? How's your week been? You've been busy, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun-filled, well, I don't know if it's fun-filled, but it's definitely a packed-filled week. And it's music-related for the most part, but it's also congressional-related.
Ooh.
I'm meeting with two new congressional members of Congress this week for the Recording Academy, which is always interesting. It's fun to do that. And yeah, so it's definitely a packed week in terms of things of that nature.
You're going to be very official this week.
I am.
Which is good. Yeah,
I am.
Good
I'm
for you.
helping other musicians and music creators alike by getting legislation passed to hopefully help us in the future.
That would be wonderful, wouldn't it?
It would. And it has happened in the past.
It has, yeah. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, we'll keep our fingers crossed for that. That something positive will come out of this as well.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So should we just dive in? I think we should just dive in.
All right. We're going for the deep end already. It's common recording myths.
Yeah. And some of these we have sort of tackled before in previous episodes. Mm-hmm. So if you want a little bit more of a deeper thing on some of these, just go back and listen to the episode. But one thing that we talked about relatively recently, and this is the first on our list here of myths, and always record at higher sample rates. That
was just like 2 weeks ago, wasn't it?
Something like that, right? Yeah, 2 or 3 weeks ago. Yeah. So it's fresh in our memory here. Yeah. So should we? You're a big proponent of 96K.
I am.
Is it always better to record at higher sample rates?
No.
No? All right.
Just say that right
point
off the
number
bat.
two. Yeah.
No. So we did kind of do a real kind of deeper discussion about it a couple of weeks ago on the sample rate episode that we just put out. But the funny thing about that is a discussion came up with a fellow producer literally a couple of days ago about this. And he has a setup that isn't quite capable of doing 96K. So it gets him kind of clicks and pops, burps and farts, that kind of thing, which tends to happen if your machine isn't quite up to powerful enough to run multiples of tracks at higher sample rates. Does it really make sense to record at that rate? No, technically it doesn't, because you really don't want those clicks and pops. However, he chose a sample rate that we discussed that we were like, nobody records at that sample rate. So we got into that little discussion of nobody records at that. And he started to like question it. And I said, you're the only person I've ever met or know that actually is trying to choose to record at 88.2. And he wanted to know kind of the theory behind that. And I get where he's coming from for doing it. And I'd said, if you feel inclined, go ahead, do it. I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't. And I look at it from the standpoint of like, for me, the way I'm choosing the sample rate has more to do with what is the end result of the product and what is the archival life of that product. Yeah. Because if it's something that's like kind of toss away music, so to speak, that is done as background, incidental background music in a reality TV show, the archival purposes of that is practically nil. It's like you do it, you throw it out, you do it, and they want it at 48K, which is still higher than 44.1, but it's not 96, it's not 192, it's not 174.4, is that what it is, or something like that? And it's not 88.2, it's specifically 48K. So I don't record anything at 44.1 unless it's a request. So that's something I don't do. But it's not a bad sample rate to technically record at. It's just not great also for archival purposes. So we do a big discussion on that a couple weeks ago. So I don't know if you want to add any more to that, but that was just an interesting conversation that just kind of popped up. And I was like, I get it if it's archival worthy to go higher.
Yeah. No, my point of view is that it's, you have to look at your system, right? Just like we said in that episode. And if you're struggling to perform at a certain sample rate, the benefits of doing that are sort of outweighed by all the problems you're having.
Yes.
So, I think if you are, if you have a system that struggles to do 96, I don't do 96. I tend to stay at like 48. And I'm like, never had an issue with anything. And also it's a little bit dependent on what I do, type of music that I do, that type of thing. But is it always better? No, it's not always better. So there we go. That's myth number 1.
Yes. Myth number 2. This is one of my favorite argument points, I think, in talking with people that are claiming to be purists about recording. And they always love to bring up this specific band when it comes up, and that is the Beatles. Yeah, man. The Beatles wouldn't have done that, or the Beatles only did this, and it's like, the
Beatles recorded on 4-track.
No.
But did they exactly. Only use 4 tracks though?
No.
It's no, this is another one that, it just drives me up the wall when I hear people say that. With all the tools that we have today, to somehow equate that's bad because the technology didn't exist in 66, but also completely disregarding that all the boundaries that the Beatles pushed with the technology they had.
Sure.
And overdub upon overdub upon overdub.
Weren't they also one of the I think they were one of the very first bands to record 8-track, if I'm not mistaken, because they strung several machines together to get extra tracks. If I'm not mistaken. I think that George Martin really pushed the envelope with those guys. So not only that, it's like when you think about certain things, it's like, the Beatles played it and it was pure. And it's like, well, what about the times when they would slow down tape to play things they couldn't play at the tempo they wanted to play them at? So they would slow the tape down in order to be able to perform a particular part. Of course, that required also retuning an instrument to be tuned to the appropriate whatever tempo the tape was slowed down to, so that when it was sped back up, it would be able to be in tune.
Yeah.
So they used tape speed and slowed it down in order to play stuff they couldn't physically play at the tempo that they wanted the recording to be at. That is a huge use of technology right there when you think about it, because it was easier to do that then than it is to do now. Because if you slow down a recording in digital and you speed it back up, you're not getting the full picture. You're getting slices of the picture you recorded, if that makes sense, because it removes samples. You don't speed up samples. It removes samples to get to the faster tempo, right? Am I wrong about that?
I think
I am.
I don't think that's necessarily the whole picture, but I think that technology exists today. You can do that, I'm sure in any DAW, but there's Vari Speed and Logic where you can do that. But there might be artifacts and stuff. But you're right in that we don't have to deal with the tuning thing. Right. Right.
In the same way.
But in the same way. But the idea here is that the thing that really gets me, never mind a performance aspect of the Beatles, right? If it was a part, perhaps, but just how they used the studio as a creative tool. And really pushed it to the limits. Especially you start getting into Sgt. Pepper or any of that post touring kind of era Beatles, right? And you see just, so
edited two
the whole
different takes of a song together to make a complete take because maybe something went wrong in another take. That is technically overdubbing and splicing and doing all kinds of crazy things to get the complete picture of the song the way they envisioned it. That's using the technology to its fullest at the time that they had it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that was just,
they didn't use autotune. Well, autotune didn't exist.
Yeah.
But if it had, I bet they would have used it.
Maybe. But I think that the whole argument is that, like you mentioned, you said the word purist.
Yeah.
In the beginning there. And I think that is something that happens a lot. And I will probably make the same point later down in another point that we're going to talk about today.
Sure.
But it's the conflation of sort of like that purist mentality that somehow makes the song better. Because that's really the end of the line. It doesn't really matter how you arrive at the final product. It's the song that matters.
Yes.
Right? A song can sound great on, let's say, 4 tracks, right? And it can sound like shit if you have 150 tracks in your DAW. It's the song that matters. Right? So how you get to the point of completion is almost irrelevant. But to think that you can do just because the Beatles did it on 4 tracks, which they didn't, but
right.
that somehow makes your song better is crazy to me.
Yeah, don't ever compare yourselves to the Beatles, especially in a public forum where it might be broadcast over airways of radio or television or cable or whatever. The moment you tend to do that, your career will tank. It just is the way it goes.
It usually doesn't end well.
Yeah, it doesn't end well. And I think the most famous case of that, was it Jesus and Mary Chain? Was that the band?
I don't know.
That came out and said that they wrote songs better than the Beatles, and shortly thereafter they disappeared.
Well, there's one way to, get yourself talked about, right?
Sure.
You better back it up.
Makes you sound
stupid. I've heard other stories and stuff. I mean, if you have that as a benchmark when you're writing, but that's great, but you might want to keep those opinions to yourself. And,
it's a good thing to do.
I think,
It happened to me actually on a radio interview. Somebody said that I had done something quote unquote better than the Beatles. And I immediately spoke right up and said, I did not say that. I don't even want to make that comparison, because it's like, that I don't even want to go there. And that was one of the most frightening moments in my career when that went out on a national radio station. And it was just kind of like, I don't want to say that I did anything better than the Beatles in that regard. However, interestingly though, last week we had mentioned a band, and then I mentioned someone's name who had played uncredited for that band. And I had a moment of conversation with said guitar player, Steve Wimet. He still talks to Eric Valentine.
Okay.
And had made a comment about his early recording days and wanting to get the Tascam 688 when you were recording 8 tracks on a cassette tape.
Right.
And Eric gave him a bunch of shit about it, apparently.
Really?
Yes. So I thought that was interesting. And Eric's theory on it is that 4 tracks on a cassette is already bad enough with how little tape you get. And now you're cutting that in half for the amount of tape that you're getting for each 8-track thing, which I thought was interesting, because then I brought up Jeff Soto, who recorded his first solo record, Love Parade, on a Tascam 688. And that thing actually sounds quite good. So, but Jeff really knew what he was doing. And I'm sure Steve really knows what he's doing. But it was just an interesting conversation to have after last week's episode with the guy and talking about Eric Valentine and all that in relation to, how many tracks do you need and what quality do those tracks need to be. So Eric's point about a 688 and 8 tracks on a cassette tape is valid. There's no question that it's not valid. But it's also interesting that you can do quality recording based on the gear that you have. So we'll get to that more of that later. But yeah, that all kind of relates back to the Beatles doing things and using the technical prowess of everything they had. Plus they had George Martin in the studio with them, who was a technical guru on top of all of that, who helped twist and bend and do all of this stuff for them. So to say that the Beatles wouldn't use today's technology is just asinine. Don't even go there.
Yeah.
It's just, they'll use anything. They would have used anything and everything they could get their hands on to get the song to the final point of where it needed to be. And yeah, and I think I've mentioned CJ Vanston on this before. He and I had a discussion about it in relation to something we'll talk about further down the line in this episode. So let's move on to our next point, which is one I know is a real sticking point for you.
It is. And that's to always use subtractive EQ.
Yes.
Absolute nonsense in my opinion. And here's why. Yeah, we've talked about EQ and EQ techniques and things in the past. Now there are certain people that adhere to this, right? As opposed to boosting, only cutting.
Yes. I've heard of that concept. I don't follow it, but I've heard of it.
Right. And I'm sure that can work for some people, but my thought of it is that, well, you use subtractive EQ when you need to subtract something out of the curve. Sure. Right? It's just use subtractive there. The idea that you shouldn't be boosting anything, I think you're really shooting yourself in the foot.
Or the face.
Let's say that, or anything, right? But it's, let's take the concept to an extreme, right? It's like, okay, well, I want more 10K in this. Okay, so in order to get more 10K, you would subtract everything under 10K to get the same result. That'd be kind of silly. That's sort of like the math. Well, to me, and I think that's in a nutshell. Now, the same could be said, of course, if you're only boosting. Yes. Right? If you say, well, I want there's too much low end in this, so I'm going to boost everything over 100. Well, that sounds just as silly, doesn't it? So
it sounds silly, but it could be done. It makes you work harder. That's the real problem. Well, it makes work harder.
Yeah, I think when you have all of these sort of hard and fast rules, you end up painting yourself in a corner that is completely unnecessary.
Yes.
So you use subtractive EQ when you need to take something out, and you use additive EQ when you need to boost something. It's as simple as that to me. So I think to only do one thing, nonsense.
It is utter nonsense. Always use subtractive EQ.
You agree with me on that?
Use whatever EQ you need, right? To make it sound awesome. And with that, we'll go ahead.
Yeah. No, just last thing I'll say before we go to break here is nobody's ever listened to a mix and gone like, ooh, he should have used more subtractive EQ on the kick. It's like nobody cares.
That could very well be. I you know what? I agree with you. I'm not listening to a mix and going, damn, he should have just used a lot more subtractive EQ in the 3K range. Huh?
Yeah, or just like, I can totally hear that he didn't adhere to using, I think he boosted something in there. Like, okay.
Silly.
Whatever.
All right, and with that silliness, we're going to take a quick word break from our sponsor. All right, and we're back, and we're talking about never using amp sims.
Yeah. You're not a real guitar player if you use amp sims, right? Isn't that the thing? And it has to have you got to have a giant tube stack, and you got to, do all that kind of stuff. That's something that you adhere to loyally, right?
Of course. Why else would I be doing this if I wasn't using my giant Marshall stack with 18 cabinets, right? Yeah, we've talked about that one kind of ad nauseum in several episodes about recording guitars. And maybe and maybe not, I have talked about this little anecdotal story where I had an artist that I was going to be co-writing an entire CD of music with, and he wanted to bring in his stack to the studio. And I said, you can bring it in, but we're not going to use it. He kind of
That's
looked
a
at
real
me.
popular
Yeah.
statement. Unless you know the guy really well, you might not want to say that.
Yeah, no, and I knew him, but it was just kind of funny because he was like all gung ho about it. And then he's like questioning it. And so I plugged him in and I said, "What sound do you want?" And then I dialed it in within a matter of, 30 seconds to a minute and a half, and he got to play it. And then he then made another comment of like, "Well, what happens if I roll off the volume on my guitar?" Because obviously amps react differently based on how you roll off volume coming from your guitar, because it changes the input value of what you're coming into the amp with. And I said, "Well, why don't you try it out and find out what you think?" So he certainly does it. And as he's doing it, he's like, jaw starts hitting the floor. He's like, "It's reacting just like a real amp." And I said, "Duh."
Yeah.
So there was that.
Yeah. But in all fairness to that, to play devil's advocate, early amp sims didn't necessarily do that.
No, that's true.
They
It
did,
did take a while to get there.
Right, so that they actually react differently and not just make the signal lower. They actually reacted,
It's a bizarre. It's a bizarre myth in
today,
today's world. It's a bizarre myth to hold on to that, and it's same would hold true for bass sims too. It's
sure
when you're doing the guitar amp or the bass amp thing, the whole concept of like don't use sims is completely dumb, asinine, silly.
Yeah, no, I think we've talked about this
Quite a bit.
lot,
we don't need
but I think
it
is but I think it is a big mentality thing, and it's a very guitar player type of a thing as well, I think. I would say again, we can probably dispel that myth, or at least not carry that much weight with that. I use them all the time. I know you do, and yeah, we've probably already said too much, but there we go.
Let's move on to point next. Point next
is you need great gear to make something cool.
I know I do.
Oh yeah. I think we can sometimes let the gear hold us back when we do things. And what I mean by that is, I could do this if I only had this piece of gear. I could do this if I only had this microphone, if I only had this interface, and if I only had these monitors, and if I only had this, and that.
Yeah, it
and
goes back to the couple of episodes that we've done, like the very first one, Know Your Gear, and then there was another one where we were talking about gear in terms of the gear acquisition, which also came the term of GDS, which was gear derangement syndrome.
Yeah.
It's like jacking the code stock, man. If I just had this.
Yeah, we need to know that guy. I think, yes, of course, we need to have a certain amount of gear if we're doing something. We need to have an interface, and we need to have whatever. But
a microphone.
Again, but this comes back to what I'm kind of hinting at there with the Beatles, right? That ultimately it is the song that matters.
Yes.
And no matter of gear is going to rescue a song that's not very good, So I think it's something that we use to, fantasize about. And we do this in software all the time. Oh, if I only had a better orchestral string library. If I only had that, I would get more placements, Yes.
It's the concept of polishing a turd when it comes to needing great gear. And if we go a step beyond the actual show Mythbusters, they actually did polish a turd.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, they did. They actually did an episode about polishing turds. So it can be done. That doesn't make it better than what the original thing is. There's a movie a couple of years ago, and I don't remember the title of it off the top of my head, but I do remember sitting through the credits, as I am wont to do when I actually see movies in a theater. I'm one of those weird guys that sits all the way to the very end of the credits until they're done.
Yeah.
And you can hear like music that either is from the movie itself or going to be on the soundtrack of the movie. And they had this song by a guy that was literally recorded on a boombox. And it fits so perfectly for what the movie was and for what the sound of what was needed for that movie. And it fit perfectly. So there you go. You got a guy singing and playing guitar into a boombox. Now, I'm quite sure that it went to a mixing guy to kind of tweak a little bit of the EQ, and then it went to a mastering guy to kind of finalize all that. But there was no separation. It was a boombox recording. That was it. And it worked perfectly for the situation. So that's where it becomes that thing of like the gear you don't need technically great gear, but what you need is great song. And then you need the wherewithal to get the right sound for that song. So would something like an Ariana Grande pop song sound awesome on a boombox, mono recording? Who knows? Could she pull it off? I bet she could. However, that doesn't mean everybody else could. It really comes down to the players you got playing and how you're manipulating that playing once it's going down into some sort of tangible form. And I've made this discussion before with somebody where they wanted like all the plugins in the world and the greatest DAW and everything else, and wanted to like go up against maybe someone like you or I recording in GarageBand with the standard plugins that come in it. And I guarantee that people that know what they're doing can take that and still make an awesome song compared to somebody that has like the greatest gear in the world and has no idea what they're doing.
Sure.
It's like trying to polish a turd, so to speak. But at the same time, if you have like all the greatest gear, but have no clue of what you're doing to use it, it does not mean what you're going to churn out is going to be great.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you have to know the gear that you're using, why you're using it, and how to use it. Now, when you mentioned the boombox thing there, and let's say you used Ariana Grande, could she pull it off? Probably, but then we're getting into artistic choices here.
Right.
And sometimes you can pull that off and it can have sort of like a lo-fi charm about it, and it can have a certain sound that can be appropriate in many situations. However, if you are John Williams and you're doing, a Star Wars soundtrack, it's like, no, it's fine. We'll just have a couple of players come to John's house and we'll just have his boombox. Well, that's obviously not going to work, right? But those are, you can make it happen. So the idea that I think both of us are kind of getting to here is, even with big proponents, like learn to use your stock plugins. Yep. How does the compressor work? How does an EQ work? What kind of reverb do you like? Just because you have 10 reverb plugins or 10 hardware boxes of reverb, that's not going to make or break your song. It's just going to give you more confusing a palette to play with. So does the gear matter? Yeah, it needs to have a certain standard. But the good thing is that today it's like so much stuff is great. Even cheap stuff is great, you know? So
I would say this in terms of trying to blow that myth out of the water, in terms of needing the great gear. Great gear can help, but it doesn't help unless you know how to use it. And to top it off, in terms of like a secret for great producing or great mixing, I would think that the producer and the artist needs to think about what is the final product supposed to sound like, and work backwards from there to understand what items you need to get to that final product. Because if you start off with no clue of where you're going, it's not going to help not knowing what you need to get there. So you kind of need to know what the end result is supposed to be in order to work your way to getting there. And then that will help determine what gear do you need in order to make that happen.
Yeah. No, that's a very, very good point. I think it was in one of Pensado places, Dave Pensado was talking about, and he did the analogy with cooking. He's like, you need to know what you're going to do with audio when it comes in. He said, you don't just go into a kitchen and not have any idea what it is that you're going to make and just start throwing shit into the frying pan. You know, you have an idea that, well, I'm going to make this dish, and then you choose the appropriate ingredients. It sounds like a dumb analogy, but it really works, because if we take that mindset, right? If I'm going to do a modern production of a black metal album, right? Okay, so I'm going to go and get some Tele guitars. I'm going to go get some synths. No, you're not. You're not going to get any of that. Like,
you're going to get a singer that sounds like Tom Jones too. That'll really.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you know, the gear, and you, in that case, you need, make sure they have like super high gain guitars. You got to tune your drums up and all this kind of stuff. You might need triggers and a good drum library, whatever, right? But you have to choose that. That's a different tool set than if you're making a modern pop track, right? Yeah, those different tools. So you need to know what you have. That matter. Right? Yeah, anything, right? But to sit and worry about, I don't have the latest SSL console plugins. Like, who cares? You know? It's like,
wait a minute.
It doesn't
matter.
What
are you talking a console plugin? I don't have the latest SSL, damn it.
Yeah.
And I need it.
No, I can. Yeah, I can. Yeah. It really confuses. I understand it, but it blows me away, the argument. You see this on like forums all the time. It's like, well, does this console emulation sound better than another company's console emulation? Does that sound more like an SSL? Does this sound more like an 1176? It's like, well, who cares, really? Like, does it sound good to you? Do you know how to use it? That's all that really matters. So the other stuff, that's for the marketing department. Let them work with that, how to sell their gear. But know the gear that you have, and
go back to episode 1.
Yeah,
check
exactly.
That episode out. We talked about it ad infinitum, and I'm gonna like snip you in the bud right now. So let's move on to Friday Finds. What do you got for us, Chris?
I have been really, really busy with a lot of tracking, but I did come across a really fun. Now, keyword there is fun, an esoteric plugin from a company called Audiothing, and they have a plugin called Wires.
Wires, and what does Wires do?
Wires is actually an emulation of sorts of Cold War era Soviet spy recording technology.
What?
So they have many.
What?
Say what? It emulates that sound that spies would use to record meetings and audio and all this kind of stuff. So it has this wonderful sort of lo-fi sound going to it. So it's very much like an effect. It has degradation of audio and delays and things like that. It's a really, really fun, cool tool.
Does it do dropouts as well?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
All that kind of stuff. Yeah. So it's go check it out. Audiothing. They have a functioning demo. It's fun. Is it something that you're going to use in every mix? No, but it is really, really cool. And if you, Wires, Audiothing. What do you got for us?
I am going with the playback functionality of Life at this point, and it is not a mixing tool. It is. Spotify has just announced that they're doing a hi-fi tier, which means that they will be streaming lossless versions of files. They call it, as Tidal used to think of saying, we are CDA, quality audio kind of thing. Well, Spotify's announced they're getting into that game. They're going to create a hi-fi tier. It will cost $14.99, which means it's $5 more than the standard $9.99 for your regular premium account. Does that mean it's translating to artists getting paid more for a stream? I have no idea. They haven't announced it, and I realize there's a lot of people out there, Spotify's the devil. But I'm not one of those people. I I think Spotify's great. I think Apple Music's great. I think Tidal's great. I think Deezer's great. I think they're all great. You're able to play a plethora of music for one monthly fee, usually around $9.99, unless you're going for the high audio tier. So welcome to the club with Spotify for their hi-fi tier that's coming soon. I guess they join the ranks of Tidal and Amazon Music, because I think Amazon does that as well. So, and
all right.
the probably the now defunct Ponos system from Neil Young, because he was trying to go for the whole high definition audio thing with his little player. So Spotify's jumping in with the hi-fi audio tier, which is cool. I'm hopeful that it means that it's as simple as flipping a switch with them, and it's not a matter of distributors having to resend audio files to Spotify, because, boy, I send them 96K files, so I'm hoping, 96 kilohertz files. So I'm hoping I don't need to re-upload those kind of things. So that
we're going to need the 192.
Yeah, right. So we can get down to CD quality audio.
Right, there you go.
So, but it's a nice step forward, because I would imagine in 5 to 10 years from now, or maybe less, who knows, when broadband speeds and mobile speeds get even faster and faster and faster, who knows? Maybe it will push the market to get to that level, but not for a while, I don't think. But yeah,
we'll see.
It's
I mean, that's another point where it's, ultimately we'll find out, does the average consumer really care?
Yeah, that's the tough part.
Hopefully we'd like to think so. Yeah. But
we'd like to think they do,
that's
but
cool.
Who knows? Yeah. So so while we're still here and we've got your attention please, go to the website insidetherecordingstudio.com/reviews so you can leave us a review, because it does actually help us to get reviews on the podcast. And we certainly hope that since you're listening this long, you would do that for us. You can also go to insidetherecordingstudio.com/gift, or any page on the website, and you can get signed up for our email list, and you will get something in return for doing so, which is some plugin presets from the Slate company of plugins, and some from the Universal Audio plugins, thanks to Chris and I, because we love doing those kinds of things for you. And you'll also get weekly reminders of what episodes and Tuesday tips have just happened in the past week, to keep you up to date so that you don't miss future episodes of ITRS. In addition to that, send us an email to Goldstar, GOLDSTAR, at Inside the Recording Studio with the word myth. And you get something fun back in your inbox this week. Plus, if you have a topic that you would like Chris and I to pontificate upon, send us you go to our contact page essentially on the website and fill out the form, and we'll take it into consideration to put it into rotation for a future episode. And with that, I'm going to say thank you for listening. We're going to say see ya.
Have a good one. Thanks for listening. Have a good one, Jody.